everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is Murphy Media. I'm your host, Michael. We are joined today. We have the great honor and privilege of being joined today by Kevin Leach of Sabre Training Advisory Group. They are a NATO, they are a group in Ukraine offering NATO military training to Ukrainians. Kevin, with that, would you want to give us a little lead in, a little background into yourself? It's been a pleasure getting to talk to you the last couple of days.
For sure. Yes. So first of all, thanks for having me on. Where to start? So I'll go all the way back to the beginning. So I first came out to Ukraine in 2018, and I got a position with the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, and that was the mission that was overseeing the ceasefire that existed prior to the full-scale Russian invasion that started last year. And so I came out here after I didn't know anything about Ukraine. I have no roots in the country. I just kind of came out blind. And after about 6 months, I started really falling in love with the place. After 2 years out here, I met my wife, and so I fell in love with her. And then just sort of carried on with a bit of a blissful existence until the invasion began last February. And that obviously changed things. My job and the mission that it was a part of were finished overnight, and the question became what I could do to help. So I spent 10 years in the Canadian Army, in the Queen's York Rangers, which is a primary reserve regiment out of Toronto, and so I had my I should also mention Armored Reconnaissance Regiment. So I had my training, but it had been about 5 years since I had gotten out. Well, pardon me, 4 years. And so I wasn't too sure right away on doing things on the military end. My wife asked me not to fight, so I promised her I wouldn't. So there's no way I was going to break that. The first thing that I landed on was bringing in medical supplies, because I said, okay, well, I know good brands. I know the sort of the industry standard gear for TCCC. So I started gathering donations to buy things like chest seals, hemostatic gauze, and tourniquets, and started to ship that into Ukraine. And then with the help of some friends out here, to bring it out to frontline areas. And eventually, with the help of some people back in Canada, I got a very good partner named Milos, who I was able to kind of spin those duties off onto. And basically it was August of last year, I had been talking with some people who were doing training out here, and I had helped out a little bit here and there. But after that August, once Milos took over the day-to-day stuff for bringing in medical supplies, I figured, okay, well, 10 years in the Army, 6 of which were spent as an instructor, I really should make use of that skill set. So in August, I started training, first with another organization, and then in November of last year, I decided to set out sort of, I would say, on my own, but I had a good team with me, and we started up Sabre as a Ukrainian, it's a community organization, but essentially an NGO. And with that, we just started growing. We at the beginning were training sort of local partisan units that would be the sort of forces that were would be conducting ambushes and delaying and maybe fixing attacks if there was another push toward Kyiv. And from there, we progressed to making trips out east to Donbass to train troops. Basically, they rotate off of the zero line positions, and we work with them, just in the first rear positions to help kind of polish their skills and introduce some new ideas. So that was going very well, and that's something we continue to do to this day. but our main focus now is working in Kyiv region with new units that are standing up as part of the preparation for the big offensives. And our whole goal is to take NATO veterans and bring them, well, get them out here and get them starting from the ground up with these new troops, learning in the, kind of learning in the NATO way, and adapting sort of Western SOPs where necessary to fit the situation out here, because there are certain cases where we're geared towards our let's say Western capabilities, and it's just not part of the reality of the war out here. So we have to rethink that. And just an example would be casualty evacuation. We're coming from especially after the global war on terror, we are coming with this expectation of, helicopters, and we're going to have a very rapid CASEVAC. We're going to have an overwhelming QRF that's going to by the way, when I start using military jargon, should I explain
if you can, as much as possible. We do have a very strong civilian following, so they would appreciate that.
Cool. Okay. So in this case, we're talking about evacuating casualties, and we're used to the situation where you've got the helicopters coming in, and then the quick reaction force, which is basically emergency reinforcements that are able to get in and overwhelm the enemy in the local area, so that casualties can be safely evacuated. Well, most of that is not relevant to the war out here, and so we have, the question is, how do we adapt? And that's one of the most difficult parts of what we're doing is making those adaptations, because we have to work with obviously work with our Ukrainian partners and get their experience, and then figure out, okay, so we have these best practices. Are they the best practices out here? And then it's a bit of it's a long process, and it's something that we're actively working on. But anyhow, I've gone and I think I've digressed quite far from an introduction. But just to give the bare facts of Sabre, we're a small nonprofit that brings out experienced NATO soldiers, especially instructors, and we aim to rebuild and reform Ukrainian forces to be in line with NATO standards, and in line with the sort of Western allies in general. And I think that puts it nicely.
And if I'm looking down, I'm taking notes actively that way I can gather my talking points as we continue our conversation. So initially you had talked about the training that you had started doing in the opening days when you moved into a combat training role. You talked about partisan training, and now you've moved to a more conventional training. What does that, or a conventional force training, I should say? What does the difference look like? Was the partisan training more of a shoestring? We're doing this quickly to get these forces trained up, moved in as the Russians were coming in towards Kyiv, and now what would be the main differences?
Well, just one thing that I want to clarify, just so I'm not making any misleading claims, is that we didn't train anyone before or while the Russians were approaching Kyiv, but okay. This was after they had been pushed to the Kyiv region. Okay. And there was, at the time, there was still a lot of worry that they would come back through from the north through Belarus, and so this was November of last year. But to answer like the difference between kind of like partisan forces, or I guess you would say non-conventional forces, although they are kind of conventional, it's different again from like our traditional understanding, especially after the war on terror. But the main difference is the tactics that they're going to use. So we are training, in the case of these partisans, we're training for a lot of more kind of like smaller teams in operation, and also they're not, what they will do is much more about harassment and delay of the enemy. So in this case, we were training a lot of in ambushing, because the idea is that these forces will lay in wait north of, in this case, north of Kiev, if they find out that there's movement from the north, and they will basically pepper the routes down with their forces, conducting ambushes. The point of which is to either delay movement of the enemy, or to fix them in a position so that conventional forces, in this case probably indirect weapons like artillery or rockets, you take an ambush so that a convoy stops, so that you dump artillery on top of the convoy in a position that you have prearranged. And that was more of the focus of what we were working on, and how that that differs. That differs a fair bit, because you're not, we're not training these guys with a mind to having a stand-up fight, because as they're partisans, and they're really, there's just light infantry, so it's just soldiers and what they can carry, and they don't even have machine guns in this case. They just have assault rifles, and in some cases marksman rifles. So things that basically they're not able to address even lightly armored vehicles, and so you train to a different skill set, and you train to a different set of tactics and a different set of missions. It's kind of a little bit more like, actually, to be frank, it's a little bit more like what insurgents would train for. You want to think about like hit and run tactics, and not, never allowing the enemy to have a direct engagement with you, because the issue with like insurgent forces or guerrilla forces is that when they have to go against, if they do go against conventional forces, they're very likely to get overwhelmed quickly, because conventional forces have, they have combined arms, for example. They have the ability to call, not like the Russians have this, but they have the ability to call in air assets, or they could have things like mortars or artillery, and that'll just be a nightmare for sort of I keep wanting to say insurgent, but not insurgent forces, but guerrilla forces. Anyhow, it didn't end up being how things played out. There never was another attack from the north. I think there was just never any capability. The only reason that they made it through Belarus in the first part was that nobody down here in Ukraine was expecting them to actually attack through Belarus, which, hindsight's 2020, seems obvious now, but back then it wasn't so.
And you mentioned that your Sabre is now currently going out into the east and is training conventional forces. For people that have followed, that the east of the country and the Bakhmut area, that is where the most violent, bloodiest fighting is currently taking place. So it is no small feat, I am sure, to take a team in and train behind the lines. Obviously, I think it would go without saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that would expose your team to those same dangers.
Within reason. I mean, everything's relative, right? So every time we go out there, we're comparing ourselves to the guys who are in the trenches and carrying out assaults against Russian positions. So of course we come back and say, oh, it wasn't too bad. But the dangers do exist. We've had some close impacts. So under 100 meters of 152 millimeter artillery. So that's just the Russian, like the standard Russian artillery round. God knows what it was fired through, but it was one of the units we were working with. We were living in one of their small, just like a small barracks. It was a building that had a large basement, and two rounds landed nearby, one in the yard of a house across the street, and the other was actually at a shawarma shop just down the road. So, there's that. We had at the other organization that I first started working with, we had S-300 missiles come in on the training site. I think 4 or 5. To be honest, I wasn't counting. And those, but I was much further away from those. I think the nearest was like 200, 150 meters at the minimum, but still enough that the blast wave tousled my hair. And so it's definitely something that we consider, especially sometimes when we're in the very close positions. We've been in positions that were close to, some viewers may be familiar with Marinka. Certainly they will have heard of Vuhledar, and then of course Bakhmut. It seems like everything's close to Bakhmut out there, but yeah, in the consideration in that case is when we're that close, is like, if there is a breakthrough, what do we do? Because we're not armed when we go out there. We have, of course, our protective equipment, our body armor and helmets, but we have no we have no right, we have no permission to carry weapons. So it's just kind of like we're kind of squishy luggage for the fighting troops. And so our protective measures in that case are basically get the hell out of Dodge if there is a breakthrough. It's something that we consider, and we have as much planning in place as we can. But it's, again, to come back to the original point that I made, is that we always compare it to it's all relative, and we compare it to the guys that are fighting. And so it's not to say that it doesn't register, because you'd be a fool to go out there without considering it, but it's not something that we I wouldn't be comfortable ever describing myself as being in danger when I'm out there, because it seems to be it would seem silly to me, because there are people who are actually in danger.
Totally understandable. So Sabre is a team, a multinational team composed of veterans from varying NATO nations. I have to ask you, the call to do this, and I'm sure it runs through all of these people that you're working with, all the trainers. What was that overwhelming feeling that I have to go, I have to do something, I have to help?
Well, I mean, for me, my whole life was here in Ukraine. I only went back to Canada a couple times a year, and just the center of gravity shifted over. So it was just a simple choice for me. My wife is Ukrainian. Our children, when we have them, will be Ukrainian, and so there's no question we need a free and intact Ukraine for our children to grow up in. For the others that come out here, it's everyone has, of course, their own individual motivation, but one thing that I've noticed is and it's repeated over and over again. And I think once upon a time I might have said that this is it's an oversimplification, but really this is a battle of good against evil. And what I often hear repeated by the people that we work with, the Westerners who come out here to work with us, is that they couldn't just stand by, they couldn't just sit and watch. And I think if we go, I've mentioned the global war on terror before, and I think that a lot of people were promised this decisive battle against evil, and then we ended up with a couple of quagmires and working with people that were not so savory, and it didn't, I don't know, I don't know how to describe this, but it didn't meet that urge for people, and so they, especially a lot of those guys who were disillusioned by their tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think many of them come out here to get that generational struggle they were promised against evil, and to fulfill the motive that initially had them signing up for the military in the first place. And then, of course, there are other motives. We'll say less less virtuous motives as well, but no one in our organization has that. It's as simple as possible. Forgive me, I have a habit of giving long answers, but put as simply as possible, it's just the natural result of a very clear-cut moral question of huge importance being asked to people who have a kind of action-oriented mentality. That's why they ended up in the military, and so it's just a natural reaction. You see, it's much the same motive that had people going to fight ISIS. It happens to be a lot easier to get into Ukraine than it is to get into Syria or Iraq, and so yeah, good against evil.
Sure. The channel is Murphy Media. We are joined today with Kevin Leach of Sabre. You had mentioned early on, you had talked about first coming over in 2018 on a mission from the OSCE. I found that interesting when you were detailing that out a little bit the other day. Can you talk us through what that mission was? I can tell you, I knew of it. I did not know very much about it initially. I'd followed the conflict, not nearly as much as I should have. So you talking about that, I was able to research that a little bit. But if you want to walk us through what the mission was and the observations that were made, the findings.
Sure thing. So the first things first, a lot of people aren't familiar with OSCE. So that's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's, you can kind of think it's a little bit like the UN, but on a smaller scale, and in my humble opinion, much more effective. It's an interesting organization. It's consensus based, which can make things difficult and make action difficult, but it leads, I think, to a lot more buy-in from the participating states. Anyhow, so the Special Monitoring Mission was formed. Oh boy, it's testing my trivia knowledge here, but it was formed around the same time that the first and second Minsk Accords were signed. And so, for people who don't know, the Minsk Accords were this kind of attempt at a peace plan after Russia first invaded in 2014, and they were imperfect. There was huge pressure against them in Ukraine because they called for territorial concessions to be made to Russia, and the historical precedent screams against that, because when you make territorial concessions, a few years later you end up with a larger invasion, which is, we had kind of de facto territorial concessions because the global community didn't speak up really after the annexation of Crimea. And then, oh, look, a larger war, not even 10 years later. So anyhow, so the Special Monitoring Mission, the remit of the mission was to monitor the ceasefire, and we did that through various means, and to gather data and then present that to the international community, so that they would have facts. In fact, the motto of the mission was "Facts Matter," and a lot of the intergovernmental organizations are taking a ton of heat out here, like the Red Cross and the UN. Of course, OSCE still does, but from the inside, I can say that the mission was full of really amazing people. I believe that the leadership of the mission really did care about getting that information and doing the job that we were set about to do. But it was, it's an organization that's built on consensus, and Russia is a member state of the OSCE. So there was tons of interference from the Russians. They had they put a lot of agents in the mission to interfere with things and try and gather data on, for example, Ukrainian positions. On the old, we called it the line of contact. That was where the conflict froze in the 2014-2015 era. But we did we did the best we could with what we had. We had there were patrols throughout Donbass, and not patrols through Crimea, but at least there were offices. I believe I may be wrong on that one, but we monitored some movement across the administrative boundary with Crimea and Free Ukraine. We were not allowed to look inside the big trucks that the Russians were moving in, and the same was in Donbass across the international border. The Russians would bring. Actually, I should amend that. We weren't monitoring movement of Russians into Crimea, but movement across the international border. And the Russians would bring in. At first, they had these big white transport trucks that they labeled humanitarian aid. Of course, we're not allowed to inspect inside because it's not humanitarian aid. It's soldiers and weapons and ammunition. And then eventually they got too lazy to paint the trucks, and you just had these big green military vehicles, obviously moving materiel in. But what are you going to do? So we, where I worked specifically was in the Technical Monitoring Center, and that was located here in the headquarters in Kyiv. And we had cameras along the line of contact facing into the sort of frozen fighting areas, semi-frozen. And it was great. We were collecting direct video evidence of violations of the ceasefire. We recorded projectiles that we saw, their trajectory, rough estimate of their point of origin, and it was quite a good system because it provided, I would say, almost irrefutable evidence of the ceasefire violations. And now, of course, the Russians accused us of being biased toward Ukraine, and the Ukrainians accused us of being biased toward Russia. And I can say that we were biased toward neither. We just reported what we saw. And now we happen to see a lot more ceasefire violations coming from the Russian side. Possibly because of the location of the cameras. The Ukrainian government was very, forthcoming with their cooperation and allowed us to place cameras where we asked. The Russian occupation government was not at all. In fact, we even recorded footage of them interfering with our cameras. There was one memorable night. It was a night shift, and we watched some idiot conscripts from one of the puppet governments climb the camera mast, and this guy's without exaggeration, his face is right next to our camera lens, and he keeps kind of looking over at it like, what, is it looking at me? And then we're moving the camera to get a better look at him, so he knew that it was, because you could see it moving. It's almost like one of those little drone dome cameras, so it's shifting and whoop, looking down at the guy. And it was that kind of silly crap, and it became very clear. I mean, obviously it's obvious now, but it became very clear over my years at the mission that the Russian side was not at all interested in peace. If you think of it as a peace support mission, there was just nothing coming from their side because, denying freedom of movement, they wouldn't let our patrols go into certain areas. There's even a suspicion that they purposely mined a patrol route, because there was, I believe it was in 2017, there was a mission member who was killed while they were out on patrol. Their vehicle, they were going down a road, and they went to do a 3-point turn, and the vehicle pulled up onto the shoulder, and an anti-tank mine had been placed right up on the shoulder. And so it was an armored Land Cruiser, but it really doesn't matter when you have an anti-tank mine. So it blew up the rear quarter of that vehicle, killed the medic who was inside, and wounded the other mission members. And so there was little stuff like that, not little in that case, but big and little examples of interference with the mission.
Interesting. So shifting back, I've taken some notes. one of the goals of Sabre, as you detailed it to me, and from everyone that I've talked to, there is this ingrained Russian, even older Soviet mentality that still exists in Ukraine. And it's very prevalent, it's widespread. And as you go through the ages of people, it's more common, and the younger people are steering away from it. We talked about this a little bit the other day. I would think that one of the main goals of all of these organizations, Sabre included, is breaking down that divide that exists, breaking down that mentality. And you talked about training troops that have been trained, and civilians that live with that Soviet mentality and implementing that NATO standard. Can you talk about the Soviet mentality, the Soviet mindset, and what that process looks like for a group like Sabre?
Absolutely. So it's something, the Soviet mindset and the communist mindset more broadly, it at its core, it doesn't recognize any intrinsic value in a human being. And so the people are treated almost like machine parts to be swapped in and out as needed. Oh, that guy got blown up. Oh, fine, just put another guy in his position. And so that philosophy carried over to their, I guess, to their military training, or to their military doctrine, is better to say. And so you have a lot more of, it's kind of based around just conscripts, and you have a small core of officers, and not NCOs really, but sort of sergeants that behave as little more than like data relays for the officer. The officer says this, and the sergeant repeats it, and smacks the conscript so that he does what he's told. And it's kind of the effect of having an army of slaves, really. And now that mentality is not, it's not so prevalent in its purest form here in Ukraine, but you still have, we'll say, maybe people up at the colonel level, who are officers at the colonel level, who were trained in the Soviet military, and so they still have, some have never tried to update. Others have updated, but still have vestiges of this attitude, so that they don't put emphasis on NCOs, or non-commissioned officers, for those who don't know, and that can really put up a barrier, because you'll have junior officers, for example, like someone at the level of platoon leader, maybe a lieutenant, and they'll be almost overwhelmed with the amount of work they have to do, because they don't have, for example, a platoon sergeant who can go around and take care of all of the sort of beans and bullets details of the troops for that officer. And so the officer is having to do the big picture thinking and planning, and all the tiny little detailed, does Private so-and-so have enough bullets in his magazines? And that, there are just no two ways about it. We've had this tested time and again in various conflicts. If you fail to invest in the individual, and if you fail to move leadership, or to diffuse leadership down to the lowest levels, you will be destroyed by a force that does that. And that's proven. It's borne itself out time and again. So what is our approach then? We, because we're coming from NATO militaries, so I was never an officer. I finished up as a sergeant in Canada. That's, I guess, around the E6 level. So I think like staff sergeant level in U.S. forces. I was at my highest, sort of a platoon second in command, and my job was all these little detailed things to make sure that the troops were ready for the mission that my platoon leader would bring to me. And most of our instructors were in similar positions. They are, junior leaders. We have some officers working with us, You know, heaven forgive me, but the core of our instructors are coming from this NCO world, and so it's our biggest concern is to kind of instill that into our students. So the group that we're working with now, we have about 80 troops, and we are even going down to the squad leader and fire team leaders to mentor them and say, look, here's this part of your job. You need to take care of it. It has to be automatic because your squad leader, your platoon leader, your company commander, they don't have time to deal with these little details. You have to. It's your job. And it's you can definitely see the generational divide there. When we work with younger, we'll say overall younger units, that comes to them much more readily. That sort of independent thinking and adoption of responsibility. And then now, I mean, this just may be a function of age. Maybe with some of the older soldiers, it's a little harder to move into that, but it still is something that they can take on board. It's just you know, it looks different from one or the other. So like, just as an example, the unit we're working with now, they trend a lot younger. There's a lot of these guys in their 20s, and so you have what is much more of a traditional structure for us with people in like the role of corporals, and in Canada we have master corporal between sergeant and corporal. So corporals, master corporals, and up to the sergeant level. And you know, so it translates quite well from our experience. And then in the units that skew older, you see kind of it's weird. It's more informal, and you have these experienced soldiers who are like willing to step up into this junior and senior NCO role, but it just doesn't look the same way, because that person may not have that rank. They just may have experience, and they may be a natural mentor for other soldiers. And so it does, we can instill it out here, but it does also have to, you know, every once in a while we get a little bit of kickback, because you do have sort of that maybe conscript attitude, or that you know, overemphasis on officers. Either the officer feels that he must do all of the micromanagement, or he, you know, we haven't seen this, thank God, but you know, that officer may have the attitude that lower ranking troops are not capable of thinking, or not capable of taking on responsibility. And that, you know, we saw this a lot of this stuff goes back even as far as like World War I, where you'd have some general would come up with some grand plan, and we can see this looking at this war early in this invasion. There's this grand plan. This is how the plan's going to go, and I'm the general, and I've come up with this, you know, a 99-step plan, and every bit of it is detailed, and I have it all on a stopwatch, and I'm ready to watch it unfold. And then, you know, the cliche is that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and you know, the 99-step plan spectacularly melts down in the first step, and the other 98 steps are completely useless. Versus the sort of Western style, and this is something that we teach. So we teach, for example, mission planning and the NATO standard 5-paragraph orders format. And really, we just, because of the structure of our militaries, we give all of the soldiers the kind of, you know, who, what, where, when, and why. And so they understand their role in the mission. They understand the intent of their commander. They understand the desired end state of some, say, operation, some patrol. And so they can carry it out. And if their leaders are killed or otherwise incapacitated, then the junior leaders, who should, in an ideal situation, should be mentored by the senior leaders to take over in such a situation. They know, okay, hey, well, we know this is where we got to go. We know this is what we have to do, and we know this is the rough time by which it needs to happen, so they can carry on. And so there you end up with a much less detailed plan, but you end up with better diffusion of knowledge throughout the unit that's carrying out that plan, and so you have more flexibility. The local commanders can make calls, like a squad leader can say, hey, this route I've been told to take, it's no good. We're going to navigate around and choose another route. And allowing that flexibility means that you don't have people running into machine gun fire in like human wave attacks, or as we've seen from the Russians, sending an entire platoon of tanks through the same minefield, getting blown up alongside one another, and just no one ever thinking, oh, hey, maybe I can reroute. And yeah, so we're kind of evangelists of this more flexible style of thinking, and we get mixed receptions. It all depends on the commanders that we meet, but we're very fortunate now. I've just had a wonderful week, so I am going to keep coming back to the people that we're training now. We have this commander of an all-volunteer unit, and he is just incredibly engaged in the training of his soldiers. He has been going out and just finding anyone who will who has something to offer in terms of training. And it was funny, we just happened to be using the same training site that a friend of his was, and so his friend got my number and put the two of us in touch, and so we've just finished our first of 4 weeks of training with them. Or we haven't finished it. Tomorrow we will, but it's been just, it's phenomenal when you see someone who gets it. He has had training. This commander has had training from NATO forces in the past, so he's familiar with all of what we are bringing to the table, and it's just needs a little help because we're kind of filling in where a training cell would in an ideal world during peacetime. Right now, everyone who would form a training cell is out leading troops, so it falls to us to fill that need. And he said today, we were just talking, and he said, I can relax now because he can take care of all that big picture stuff up at his level, and he's quite a senior officer, and we're here looking at all the little details, making sure that his soldiers are carrying their rifles the right way, making sure that they are moving in the formations that they need to, making sure they're understanding why do you use this formation, why do you transition, why is it so important that you maintain that the first squad in a platoon maintains communication with the second squad and then with the third. And it's so it's great, and in cases like that, this is where you can see the future of Ukraine that's coming in. The people who want to embrace that individuality, embrace that movement away from the hardcore materialist people as machine parts thinking that's so prevalent in the legacy Soviet system, and still lives on in the friggin' Russian one.
A couple of things I had written down while you were explaining that. There's a phrase here that was often used by one of my history teachers. The Germans would have won both world wars had they have learned to walk on the grass. So talking about that inflexibility to deviate from the plan, and for your feedback, there's no greater example of that Soviet mindset than the initial convoy that was stuck outside of Kyiv. Yeah, the lead car may have been out of gas, but no one had the foresight at the time to deviate from the laid out plan to look for gas or to be able to direct the troops at the front line. And how many generals and colonel grade officers did we see that were picked off by Ukrainian snipers during that time because there was no adaptability to the situation.
There's no if you don't devolve power to the lower levels, then yeah, when there's some log jam, because of the number of troops involved, well, God forbid you let a sergeant make a decision, or let a lieutenant make a decision, or let a captain make a decision. So yeah, General whatever Isov has to come to the front of the line and then expose himself to sniper fire and then pay for it. Yes, it is. It's that very harshly delineated style of society where you have the, and I mean this is just Russian society top to bottom. You have this layer of oligarchs forming an untouchable aristocracy, and then below them you have various levels of functionaries and we'll say favored servants, and that's where these military guys fit in. But the bottom strata, which make up of Russian society, which make up their non-commissioned forces, are not seen as functional humans. I mean, in many cases they aren't when you see the horrific things that they do, but I guess they're viewed correctly by their officers. But they are not trusted. Even the ones that could possibly make decisions are not trusted to make decisions. And so yeah, you have this resulting log jam that is just because oh, oops, we ran out of fuel. Oh, it turns out Kiev is the same distance that that it started out as. And God knows what they thought they'd be able to achieve. Pushing such a huge echelon behind quite a thin fighting force, and then having that fighting force degraded the whole way along, and then eventually just leaving everything totally exposed to. I ended up. I mean, a lot of the damage too to the vehicles in the convoy was done by small, pairs of soldiers on quad bikes with RPGs just riding along, firing at whichever target they chose, because what were the Russians going to do about it? And no, that's a perfect example of that inflexibility. It's just, God forbid you let your lower commanders or enlisted soldiers make a decision, and so you just end up with total paralysis. And they have learned to one thing is a lot of, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but on our side we certainly have a tendency to I mean, it's worth disparaging your enemy, but we can disparage them too much sometimes and just kind of tell ourselves a beautiful story where the Russians have learned nothing and are on the brink of losing, and it's all just kind of a foregone conclusion, which we mustn't fall into that trap, because we start thinking like that, we're not, the support drops off, the attention drops off, and then we risk shooting ourselves in the foot and losing this war.
Well, and that was actually the perfect segue. We've seen some flexibility, some ability to learn and process their shortcomings. The Wagner troops were the first on the Russian side of life to start employing small unit tactics to some success in the East. And now we're seeing the Russian military, the VDV, so on. They're starting to employ those same smaller unit tactics. Are you getting feedback on that from the troops that you're training, where they're using these smaller teams to take a position, and then there may be a BTR or something that comes along to try and hold the position, but they're still not necessarily sure if they're killed in that process? They just continue to send these smaller teams.
It's well, actually, I'll have a better answer for that next week. But we haven't actually had too much contact with guys who have been fighting against the higher grade Wagner forces, because there's two levels of Wagner. There's the kind of the jail scum that they scrape out of their old gulags, and then there is the actual PMC employees who are, in most cases, very well trained, very motivated, intelligent, just evil. And so the higher grade ones, no one that we've worked with yet has had too much contact with them, but there certainly are saying to it. This is one of the things that we're working with the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade in Donbass, and that is one thing that one of the squad leaders said is he told me, he said, these guys aren't stupid. He said they're not all useless, and he says they are learning, and we need to learn faster. And so, I mean, I guess really that would be the very simple feedback that we've gotten is that we need to learn faster. We need to get a higher concentration of properly trained troops here in Ukraine faster to make decisive moves, to make the kind of pushes possible, like we saw in Kherson and even more in Kharkiv when that region was cleared, because it's, you know, we're not. And this is something that this is some other feedback is none of the soldiers that we work with are under the illusion that we're going to win a war of attrition against Russia, because they've just got millions more people to throw into the fire, and we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't even think about that anyway. It's you know, people's lives are precious, and they're not machine parts, as a matter of fact. So that is the conclusion, I guess. You know, that is the feedback that we've had, is that we need to get Ukrainian forces leveled up and modernized fast enough to make these decisive moves, so that we can outmaneuver the Russians, and you know start catching them in these partial encirclements and forcing them to either give up, you know, tens of thousands of troops, or get them the hell out. Because the goal is, you know, really at the end of the day, the goal is not to maximize Russian casualties. The goal is, sometimes that's the case because it's what's needed to defeat them, but the goal is just to get them the hell out of Ukraine, and by hook or by crook, that's what we're going to do. But it has to, you know, that means getting a modern maneuver warfare force out here in Ukraine, and it's, you know, it's what we're doing slowly but surely. It's happening. It's just, we need to make sure it happens fast enough.
The channel is Murphy Media. I'm your host, Michael. As I said earlier, we're joined by Kevin Leach of Sabre, and this has been a fascinating conversation. I did want to ask you a couple more things. You mentioned that the group of 80 that you're training, you're getting good buy-in, and I did want to ask. I want to phrase this appropriately, and I still may not.
No worries.
Is there pushback? We know that there are Western training groups in country. Is there active pushback, or is there nominal acceptance? And what do both of those things look like from that old school Ukrainian commander? And I don't know how much of that you've experienced personally, but there has to be buy-in, not only from the foot soldier and the company commander, but it has to follow up the chain. So are we seeing that take place more now? And I guess I would couch that just very quickly, and then I'll stop.
No worries.
We've seen the Western training pay dividends around Kyiv. We've seen it pay dividends in Kharkiv. We've seen it pay dividends in Kherson. So the product is being put at their feet. Is there that acceptance?
Yes, unequivocally, yes. That's one thing. As you know, I don't want to give people the impression that the kind of like old Soviet attitude is at all prevalent, because it's not. And again, there is a noticeable generational divide, but at the same time, you know, the training that we're conducting now, we were speaking to a colonel about that, and it's a man in his late 50s and early 60s, so he was certainly brought up in that Soviet system, but he, individually he rejects it completely, and he was he was very eager to have the training that we're offering, we've never quite had such a fast turnaround between meeting with these people, kind of showing our credentials, proving our bona fides, and then having students placed in front of us. And so the buy-in is here. They really, I don't need to employ too many salesmen, is what I mean to say, because we're in demand, and as are Western trainers in general, and the buy-in is coming at many different levels. In some places it's a little slower, in some places a little faster, but the bare fact is that we would get, this is the fun thing, and it's what Russians don't understand about Ukraine. We would get nothing done if we weren't first obtaining this buy-in, because sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes it can be a little bit like herding cats, getting Ukrainians to get together and do something. But that's because you have to get on, and every individual has to kind of consent and like what's going on, or else they just won't participate. And we have had guys that just said, look, I don't feel like participating in this training. I'm going to go sit over here. And it sucks. You try and convince them to stick with it, but not every, you can't every time. And sometimes there's various reasons why they'll do that. But if the upshot of it is that if once you do get that buy-in, once you do convince the students that what you have is of value, you get incredible motivation. People that are willing to push themselves way harder than even what I saw in my time in the Army, and so it's when you see that, it's genuinely inspiring. So yeah, a very short answer is that we're seeing enormous buy-in. There's huge demand for what we're providing. It's now just really a supply problem. And this is a note I'll make, I mean, maybe a little selfishly, but the one thing that is lacking from Western support is support for in-country training. And, part of it is just kind of government reticence, because of course, it's not like we're some established PMC. But the other part is a kind of, I don't know. Well, to be honest, I don't know. But it seems as if many people in different quarters think that, oh, well, it's enough to have these NATO training programs outside of the country. But the issue is that when it has to be done outside the country, you're adding time costs. You're adding opportunity costs for those units that you have to take outside of the country. You're adding just plain old financial costs, because the transportation, someone's paying for the transportation, someone's paying for their lodging and food, and it turns, it adds and that just adds and that's not to say, or pardon me, that is to say nothing of just the logistics of moving everybody out there and then back. And I think that that organizations like ours, and this is where the selfish part comes in, but organizations like ours, we are ideally positioned. We handle, it's kind of, you subcontract. We handle all the vetting. We handle our own lodging. We handle our own transportation, and we do it all for a fraction of the cost of a government program for those reasons. And so it's something that is, we frankly need more support here, because I don't want to. I spoke with someone recently from, not like somebody super high up, but I spoke to someone from the US DoD, and he let me know basically the number of troops that the Ukrainian government needs trained per month, and the number that the maximum capacity of the NATO training programs. And I don't want to say too much, but those numbers they're not going in the direction that we want them to. And so how do we remedy that? In-country training. And there's all kinds of political barriers to sending in government forces, of course, but you have I guess 3 or 4 at this point generations of experienced Western troops that are, I mean, hell, we're already out here. We're already doing the work. And whenever we make a post looking for new people to join the organization, we get flooded. So there's incredible demand for what we're doing. There's an incredible supply of instructors. Just what we need is the material and financial support.
And again, a perfect segue. When people watch this, it's very obvious that you're passionate about what you do. You believe in what your mission is. If people take up that same belief and they want to invest in Sabre, how do they go about doing that?
It's real easy. We have a nice website, www.sabretag.org, SABRETAG.org, and people can head over there. They can see. Actually, we have a short history of the organization. We have information on the units that we've worked with. We've got tons of media, and there's more coming. And then they can also follow our donation link there. They can set up a monthly donation if they feel like it, a one-time donation. It's a little cliche, but really every little bit helps. Even a $10 donation, that's going to help us with fuel for the week, or it's going to help my guys get food. And it really makes a huge impact.
And the one thing that I've ran into with volunteers such as Kevin, and there must be something in the water, but it runs through all of them. Asking for donations is not an easy deal. It's not an easy thing to do. So that's where we come in. We want to give you guys a platform and project this as far and wide as we possibly can. So everyone, there will be in the description the website for Sabre. And as Kevin said, you can make a monthly donation, a one-time donation, $5, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000. It will be in good hands and will be going towards a great cause. So you'll find that in the description. And the one thing that I would like to close on, Kevin, is the Ukrainian people. You've moved to Ukraine. Your life is in Ukraine. You've married a Ukrainian woman. You find something wonderful and fascinating about the Ukrainian people. And when I had talked with our mutual friend Ian of Dynamic Acquisitions, he said that Kevin is more Ukrainian than some Ukrainians. And so what is it? The West, there's a common phrase that's going around, and I won't go on my soapbox about this, but we're calling it donation fatigue. And I think you're a perfect point of contact as a Westerner who has found something wonderful about these people, and you encourage the investment in these people, and you've set up your life amongst these people quite literally. So can you communicate to the audience what it is about the Ukrainian people that makes them so worthy of this investment, makes them so worthy, and makes you so optimistic about the future of Ukraine?
I might need another hour just to go on this, but the first thing, it was when I first came out here, I was so struck because the average person that you stop and talk to is just truly engaging. The attitude of freedom here, people, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of propaganda surrounding Ukraine, there's a lot of stuff said about Ukraine, but I mean, truly, the freedom is in the air here. It's in the water, in the soil. You have people of all walks of life, every imaginable set of opinions, and they just leave each other alone to live their own lives. And it's something that I think we could really take a page out of that book in the West, because I feel like a lot of people in the West feel empowered to impose their values on others. But and with, of course, there are certain things like, if you walk down the street naked here, people are going to say, hey, what are you doing? But there's just so much. There's that attitude of freedom. There's a kind of quiet confidence and dignity. On more than one occasion, I'm a foreigner. I don't know a lot of the unwritten rules here. So just in one case, I stepped up onto a bench to tie my shoe, and this guy walking by stops and he says, "Hey, it's not for tying your shoe. It's not for stepping on. That's for sitting." And because you're putting your dirty shoe onto a bench, but the fact that he is going to go ahead and stop me because it's we'll say a mildly antisocial behavior, but having the confidence to do that, or there was a big surge of tourists here a little while before the invasion began, and a friend of mine witnessed a tourist litter in the street, and he walked over, tapped the guy on the shoulder, and he said, "Don't litter. Go pick up that garbage and put it in the trash." And it's that, like, the biggest things are freedom, dignity, just like this work ethic, and I think a lot of Ukrainians may not describe themselves as optimistic, but you see it in terms of this aspirations. Yes, you talk to a young person here, of course, not everyone, but a lot of young people here. They've got the job that they do. They have the kind of plan for their future in order to guide them towards their aspirations, whether it's owning a home or even starting a business. And then you have sort of the hobbies that they do, which is just aside from their job. They don't just go home and watch Netflix. And if I was to sum it all up into one word, I would just say that that by and large, Ukrainians are engaged in the business of living. They get out in the world. They are curious about things. Especially when you're a foreigner, and then especially when you speak Ukrainian, you get asked all sorts of questions. What's this like in Canada? How do you like this in Canada? Do you guys have this in Canada? Oh, I heard there's a lot of Ukrainians in Canada. Do you know any? It's just engaged in the world, and that we live in this era where everybody is ultra cynical, and if someone disagrees with you, it's because they're a bad person and they don't think the right things, and so you have to cut them out of your life. It's kind of, we've got ourselves in this kind of like cult isolation from one another. And now we have totally different circumstances here in Ukraine, but what you see is for a long time I thought to myself, oh wow, traditional Western democratic values are alive out here in Ukraine, and then that was my silly framing. It took me an entire year of living out here before I realized Western values. No, it's Ukrainian values, and it's the kind of the things that we aspire to in the West are instantiated here in Ukraine. They are brought into existence here in Ukraine, and it's because those values are, first of all, I think they're universal among humans, but here they're rooted in a different history here. And so I think if I was to sum it up, I would just say that this engagement in life, this dedication to dignity and freedom, I've been all over the world. I've been fortunate to travel a lot, and it's uniquely strong, these values here. And so that is what's worth saving, because the alternative is this make a Star Trek reference here, but this Borg collective of kleptocracy and oligarchy that is Russia, and that's just left over from the Soviet Union, which is left over from the Russian Empire. And picking between those two, easy choice.
That might be the best answer to a question that I've had yet. There's from all the volunteers I've talked to, our friend our friend Kate in our Instagram circle, she refers to it as World War II values that were very prevalent when the vets came home. And you making that distinction, it's not necessarily Western values on display, it's Ukrainian values. That's a beautiful description. With that, I don't know that we could end it any better, but this has been wonderful. If everyone that is tuned in, if you will check the description below, you will find the website for Sabre, sabretag.org. Check the website out, go through it, take a look, and fixate on the donation page. Sabre is an organization that's doing noble work. They're giving Ukrainian soldiers the skills they need to drive an invader out of their country and protect their families. And with that, my friend, is there anything that you can think of that might be worth mentioning that we haven't covered today?
No, I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and something may occur to me later, but no, I really, all I have to say is that I appreciate you having me on, and bringing, or adding my voice to the conversation.
Yes, sir. The honor is mine, and you have a home here anytime. You, any member of your team that would like to reach out, put things out to the public. We like establishing a well thought out, honest point of contact for the American people, for the international community that may hopefully see this. So anytime, you're always welcome here. And this has been wonderful. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, I appreciate you bringing me on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll see you soon.
All right. Awesome. See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye.